Cowboy followed Apache into red canyons, and the truth Apache revealed tied their fates together. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Caleb Thompson had spent most of his life out in the open plains of the western frontier. A man of few words, he preferred the company of his horses and the quiet that came with tending his ranch. The vast stretch of land he called home was a place where the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and red, and where the wind whispered tales of old. Yet, one fateful day, Caleb found himself following a trail that was not his own. It started with a lone Apache woman, Ayanna, whom he had helped when he found her injured in the desert. The moment he laid eyes on her, he felt a connection, though he could not explain why. Her strength, her spirit, even in such a weakened state, stirred something in him that he had long buried. She had thanked him, her voice low and uncertain, but there was a sadness in her gaze that Caleb couldn't shake. As she moved deeper into the canyons, Caleb followed, driven by a mixture of curiosity and a sense of duty. He knew the dangers of the land, especially when it came to the Apache people, whose customs and ways were foreign to him. But there was something about Ayanna that made him forget all of that. The further Caleb traveled into the red canyons, the more he realized that this was no ordinary journey. Ayanna moved with purpose, her eyes always scanning the horizon, as if she were waiting for something, or someone. Caleb kept his distance, never quite sure if he was truly wanted on this path or if his presence was an inconvenience. Still, he could not bring himself to turn back. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the jagged rocks, Ayanna finally spoke. "You should turn back," she said, her voice strong despite her weariness. "The path you follow leads to a truth you may not be ready to face." Caleb was taken aback. What truth? What was it that this woman knew, something so deep and hidden, that even the harsh land itself seemed to hold its breath? The truth she spoke of was not just her story, but one that bound their fates together in ways Caleb couldn't yet understand. With every step they took deeper into the canyon, Caleb felt the weight of her words pressing on him. Ayanna stopped in her tracks as the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. She turned to him, her face solemn. "They are coming," she said, "and when they do, you will know what you are meant to do." The air grew still, and for the first time, Caleb felt the full weight of the journey ahead of him. He had not just followed her into the canyons. He had followed her into the unknown, a place where the past and present collided, and where the truth, when revealed, would change everything. Caleb could not turn back now, not when he had come so far. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: Ayanna's fate, and his own, were intertwined in a way that neither of them could escape. Caleb followed Ayanna as the sun dipped lower behind the towering cliffs, casting long shadows that stretched across the canyon floor. The wind was still, but the silence between them was not one of peace. Ayanna's warning echoed in his mind, asterisk. "The path you follow leads to a truth you may not be ready to face." Asterisk, what could she mean? What truth could lie ahead that could change everything? They had been walking for hours, the red canyon seeming to close in on them with every step, as if the earth itself was watching them, waiting for something to happen. Caleb's mind raced with questions, but Ayanna remained quiet, her pace steady and unyielding. He could feel the weight of the journey pressing on him, but he refused to stop. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As they continued, Caleb stole glances at Ayanna, watching the way she moved, sure, confident, and yet there was something else in her eyes. It was a look of someone carrying a heavy burden, a secret that only she knew. Her posture was proud, but there was a sadness to it, a sadness that Caleb didn't understand. The canyons began to narrow, the walls on either side rising higher, blocking out the last of the daylight. The red stone seemed to glow in the fading light, casting eerie shadows that made the air feel thick, almost suffocating. Caleb could sense that they were nearing something important, something that had been waiting for them. They reached a small clearing, and Ayanna stopped, turning to face Caleb. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet urgency in her stance. "We are here," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that made Caleb's heart race. This is where the truth lies. Caleb didn't speak, but his gaze followed hers as she motioned to the ground before them. The earth was marked with symbols, carved into the rock, etched into the dirt, symbols Caleb didn't recognize but felt a deep, unexplainable connection to. Ayanna knelt, her fingers brushing the carvings as if she were greeting an old friend. Caleb watched her, his curiosity growing stronger with each passing second. What was this place? Why had she brought him here? Ayanna's voice broke through his thoughts. This is where my people's history is written, where our past and future are tied together. Caleb stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of her words. Your people? He asked, though he knew the answer. You're Apache. Ayanna looked up at him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of sadness and understanding. I am, yes. But more than that. I am the last of my tribe's bloodline. Caleb's breath caught in his chest. He had known Ayanna was important to her people, but this was something different. She was the last? The weight of her words settled in his chest, and suddenly, the enormity of their journey together became clear. This wasn't just about helping her survive. This was about something much bigger, something that could change the fate of an entire people. As the silence between them stretched, Caleb realized that the truth Ayanna had spoken of was not just a revelation about her past, but one that would change his future as well. They were no longer strangers on a journey. They were two souls bound by fate, caught in the currents of history, and now it seemed there was no escaping the path they had set upon. Ayanna stood, dusting her hands off, and looked toward Caleb with a sense of finality. It is time, she said quietly. The world you know will never be the same after tonight. Caleb didn't know what to expect, but he could feel the pull of destiny in the air. Whatever lay ahead, he knew it was something they both had to face together. The wind had begun to pick up, carrying the scent of dust and dry earth, swirling around them as the sun dipped lower behind the canyon walls. The once peaceful Red Canyons now felt like a living, breathing entity, pressing in from all sides. Caleb stood beside Ayanna, his heart pounding in his chest. The symbols carved into the earth below them seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't comprehend, as though they were the very foundation of something ancient, something forgotten. Ayanna had led him here, but what now? What was the truth she had promised to reveal? Ayanna moved toward the center of the clearing, her steps slow but deliberate. She glanced back at Caleb, her expression unreadable. Do you feel it? She asked, her voice low. Caleb's brow furrowed in confusion. Feel what? Ayanna's eyes locked onto his. The connection. The pull of the past. This place is where the fates of my people were written. It is where our history begins, and where it may end. Caleb watched her closely, trying to understand her words. She was speaking of something far beyond his experience, something that tied her and her people to this land in a way he couldn't fathom. The weight of her words settled in the air around them, heavy with meaning. She was more than just a woman on the run. She was the key to something much larger, something that had been hidden for generations. Ayanna stepped forward, kneeling beside one of the symbols etched into the rock. Her fingers traced the lines, her eyes closing as if in a silent prayer. Caleb felt a strange chill run through him as he watched her, the atmosphere thick with an energy he couldn't explain. It was as if the land itself was alive, watching them, waiting for something to happen. Ayanna opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with a seriousness that took Caleb by surprise. This is where it all began. The truth about my people, about their struggle, about their survival. Caleb felt his chest tighten. What truth? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ayana's lips parted as if to speak, but she paused, looking out over the canyon. Her expression softened, and for a moment Caleb saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before: vulnerability. My people were betrayed, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of pain. We were forced off our land, driven into these canyons, where we fought to survive. But the land has always remembered us. And now, it calls us home. Caleb took a step forward, his heart racing. What does that mean? Ayana's gaze shifted back to the symbol on the ground. It means that the truth of our people, the truth of their sacrifice, is written here. And now, it is time to awaken that truth. She rose to her feet, her movements fluid and purposeful. Caleb followed her, though a sense of unease settled in his chest. What was she about to do? What was this truth that could change everything? Ayana reached into the pouch at her side, pulling out an object wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small stone, smooth and polished, with strange markings etched into its surface. Caleb stared at the stone, feeling a sense of recognition that he couldn't place. It was as if he had seen it before, in a dream or a memory long buried. This is the key, Ayana said, her voice barely above a whisper. This stone holds the truth of my people. The truth that has been hidden for too long. Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. What had he gotten himself into? What was the truth that Ayana was about to reveal, and how would it change the fate of them both? Caleb stared at the small stone in Ayana's hand, its surface smooth and cold under the fading light. The strange markings etched into it seemed to pulse with an energy that Caleb could feel deep in his chest, as though the stone itself was alive, waiting to reveal something. Ayana held it carefully, almost reverently, her fingers tracing the symbols as if they were a secret language only she could understand. Caleb's heart raced as he watched her, a sense of unease creeping through him. What was she about to do? What had she uncovered in this desolate place that could change everything? This is the truth, Ayana said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of finality that Caleb hadn't expected. She held the stone up to the light, and the fading sun seemed to catch on the markings, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. The air felt thick with anticipation, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The truth of my people, Ayana continued, her voice low and steady. Hidden for generations. This stone was passed down through my family, a symbol of our heritage, our struggles and our hope. But for too long, it's been kept in the dark, just like we have. Caleb swallowed hard, his mind racing. He wanted to ask more questions, to understand the full weight of what she was saying, but he held back. He had a feeling that the truth, when it came, would be more than he could have ever imagined. Ayana's eyes met his, and for the first time, Caleb saw the full depth of the burden she carried. My people have been forgotten by the world, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Driven from their land, their homes, their way of life. But this stone holds the key to everything. The truth of what happened to us, and what we must do to survive. Caleb stepped closer, drawn to her by the gravity of her words. He could feel the tension building between them, a connection that was deeper than just the events of the past few days. It was as if the weight of history itself had brought them together, and now, it was time to face whatever was coming. Ayana carefully placed the stone back in the pouch at her side, securing it once more. We must go, she said, her voice firm, as if a decision had been made. Caleb nodded, though he had no idea what was ahead. He only knew that whatever it was something they had to face together. As they walked deeper into the canyon, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a new chapter of their lives, one that neither of them could have predicted. The canyon walls seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing longer as the sun sank lower in the sky. Caleb didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: Ayana's past was now a part of his own, and whatever truths were about to be uncovered, they would shape both their fates forever. They walked in silence, the weight of their shared journey settling in the space between them. Caleb could hear the faint sound of hooves in the distance, and for a moment, he wondered if they were being followed. But Ayanna didn't seem concerned. Her eyes were focused ahead, her steps purposeful, as if she knew exactly where they were going. Caleb followed, trusting her guidance, though he still didn't fully understand where this path would lead. As they reached the end of the canyon, Ayanna stopped and turned to face him, her eyes full of determination. "The truth will be revealed," she said softly. "But we must be ready for it. We can't turn back now." Caleb nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. There was no turning back. Whatever lay ahead, they were in it together. The canyon stretched before them, its walls towering like ancient sentinels, guarding secrets that had been buried for centuries. Caleb could feel the change in the air, the weight of history pressing down on him with every step. Ayanna walked ahead, her movements confident, almost as if she were following a path that only she could see. Caleb's thoughts swirled as he tried to make sense of everything that had happened. What had he gotten himself into? What was this truth she had spoken of, and how would it change everything? They had come so far, and yet Caleb felt as though they were only scratching the surface of a much deeper mystery. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the canyon walls, a strange stillness filled the air. Caleb looked around, the silence hanging heavy between them. Ayanna stopped suddenly, her body tensing as if she had heard something he hadn't. She turned to him, her eyes filled with an intensity that made Caleb's heart skip a beat. "We're close," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Caleb took a step closer, trying to read her expression. Asterisk. "Close to what?" Asterisk. Ayanna didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached down and pulled the stone from the pouch at her side, holding it up to the fading light. As she did, Caleb noticed something he hadn't seen before. There was a faint glow emanating from the stone, a soft, almost imperceptible shimmer that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Ayanna's eyes met his. "This is the key," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that made Caleb feel as though the ground beneath them had shifted. Asterisk. "This stone holds the truth of my people. The history they've tried to erase. The power that was taken from us." Asterisk. Caleb's pulse quickened. He had known there was something important about the stone, something that tied Ayanna to this place, but he hadn't realized just how deep the connection ran. She looked at the stone for a long moment, her fingers tracing the symbols as if she were seeking answers in its depths. "The truth is hidden in plain sight," she continued, her voice distant, as if she were speaking more to herself than to him. Asterisk. "All of it, right here, waiting to be uncovered." Asterisk. Caleb swallowed, his throat dry. He wanted to ask more, to understand what she meant, but something in the air told him that words alone couldn't explain the magnitude of what was happening. Ayanna turned away from him, her gaze fixed on something in the distance, as though she were waiting for something to appear. Caleb followed her gaze, his eyes searching the canyon, but there was nothing, just the darkening shadows and the silent stretch of land ahead. Then, out of nowhere, a low sound echoed through the canyon, the unmistakable beat of hooves on stone. Ayanna's expression changed in an instant. She stiffened, her body alert, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Caleb's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the sound, his senses on high alert. The hooves grew louder, faster, and then, through the shadows, he saw them, figures on horseback, emerging from the darkness like ghosts. Ayanna stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Asterisk. "They've come." Asterisk. Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. He knew this wasn't just a chance encounter. This was it, the moment Ayanna had warned him about. The truth was about to be revealed, and everything was about to change. The riders rode closer, their movements swift and sure, as if they had been tracking them for days. Caleb's hand instinctively went to the rifle at his side, but Ayanna's hand stopped him. "No," she said firmly. Asterisk. "These are not enemies. They are my people." Asterisk. Caleb's eyes widened as the riders drew nearer, their faces hidden by the shadows, but their presence was unmistakable. Ayanna's gaze never wavered, her body still and resolute. She stood her ground, and Caleb, despite his fear, followed her lead. As the riders dismounted, Caleb could feel the weight of the moment settle in. This was the truth Ayanna had spoken of, the truth of her people, the truth that had been buried for so long, was finally coming to light. The riders dismounted, their movements fluid and practiced, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. Caleb stood frozen, his hand still resting on the rifle by his side, but his instincts told him to wait. These weren't enemies. They weren't here to harm him. Ayanna's voice had been firm, and something in her calm demeanor reassured him, though the tension in the air remained thick. Ayanna stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she addressed the riders. Her posture was proud, strong, yet there was something tender in the way she regarded them, as if they shared a bond far deeper than mere survival. Caleb watched as the riders began to remove their hoods, revealing the faces of men and women with deep, weathered features, their eyes fierce yet kind. These were the Apache warriors, the protectors of the land, and they looked at Ayanna as one would look at a leader, someone who had earned their respect, someone they were bound to by blood. "Ayanna," one of the riders spoke, his voice low but filled with reverence. Caleb couldn't help but notice the way the man's tone shifted when he spoke her name. She was more than just a woman, they all knew it. "The time has come," the rider continued, his gaze shifting briefly to Caleb before returning to Ayanna. "The truth is stirring. The land calls, and we must answer." Ayanna nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the rider's face. "Yes, it is time," she replied softly. She turned to Caleb, her gaze intense yet filled with an almost imperceptible sadness. "This is my people's fate, Caleb. The truth of who we are, what we've lost, and what we must reclaim." Caleb stood there, unable to find the words to respond. He had known Ayanna was important to her people, but he had never imagined she held such a revered place among them. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a leader. A symbol of everything they had fought for. The rider stepped forward and extended his hand to Ayanna, an offering of trust. She accepted it without hesitation, and in that moment Caleb saw it. He saw the weight of responsibility in Ayanna's eyes, the burden she had carried for so long. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was fighting for her people, for their future. As the group gathered around Ayanna, Caleb felt the pull of their shared history, their shared struggle. He had never been part of this world, but standing there in the heart of the canyon, surrounded by these warriors, he felt as though he had always belonged. The riders spoke in low voices, their words flowing like a river, deep and purposeful. Caleb could only catch fragments of the conversation, but he understood enough to know that they were preparing for something, a battle, a reckoning, something that would shape the future of the Apache people. "We must reclaim what is ours," Ayanna said, her voice strong, her words echoing in the canyon. "The truth is not just in the past. It is in the land, in the air, in the blood of my people. And it is time for us to take it back." Caleb looked at Ayanna, his heart swelling with a mixture of awe and admiration. He had come to this place as an outsider, but now, he could see his own fate tied to hers. He wasn't just helping her escape anymore. He was helping her fulfill something much greater, a destiny that was not only hers but the Apache people's as well. The riders began to form a circle around Ayanna, their faces solemn but filled with determination. Caleb took a step back, watching as they prepared to move forward. The time for words had passed. Now, it was time for action. Ayanna's gaze met his once more, and in that moment, Caleb knew that whatever came next, he would face it by her side. The truth was waiting, and together, they would uncover it. The riders moved with purpose, their horses' hooves kicking up the dust as they began to form a procession, leading Ayanna and Caleb deeper into the heart of the canyon. The silence of the land, once overwhelming, now felt like a living, breathing presence, urging them onward. Caleb felt his pulse quicken, the weight of the moment pressing down on him as they moved through the narrow, winding paths. Ayanna's quiet confidence was a steady guide, and though Caleb had no idea what was about to happen, he knew one thing for sure: this path, this journey, was now as much his as it was hers. As they passed through the canyon, Caleb's eyes were drawn to the jagged rock faces that towered over them, their surfaces carved with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dimming light. He realized then that the land itself held the secrets Iona spoke of, the truth of her people, buried deep in the earth and sky, waiting to be uncovered. They stopped at the base of a great stone formation, the rock towering above them like a monument to something ancient. The riders dismounted, their movements deliberate, and Iona stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the stone as if it were calling to her. Caleb followed her, his curiosity growing with every step. As they approached the stone, Iona spoke, her voice low but filled with a quiet intensity. "This is it," she said, her words heavy with meaning. "This is where it all began. The heart of my people's history. The place where our fates were shaped." Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what Iona was about to do, but he could feel the significance of the moment, as if time itself had slowed down to bear witness. Iona reached out, her fingers brushing against the surface of the stone. The riders stood behind her, watching in silence, their eyes filled with a mixture of reverence and anticipation. Caleb felt as though they were all holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. As Iona's hand made contact with the stone, a sudden, sharp crack echoed through the canyon. Caleb jumped back instinctively, his heart racing, but Iona didn't flinch. Her eyes remained focused on the stone, her expression unwavering. Then, something incredible happened. The rock beneath her hand began to glow, a soft, golden light radiating from the markings carved into its surface. Caleb stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. The stone was alive, pulsing with an energy that felt ancient and powerful, like it was awakening from a long slumber. Iona stepped back slowly, her eyes still locked on the stone. "The truth is here," she said quietly, her voice filled with awe. "It's been waiting for us." Caleb could feel the air around him shift, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. He glanced at the riders, their faces a mixture of wonder and recognition. They had seen this before. They knew what this moment meant. "It is time," Iona said, her voice steady now, as though she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. "The land will reveal what has been hidden for so long." Caleb felt a deep sense of reverence wash over him as the light from the stone intensified, illuminating the canyon walls with an almost blinding brilliance. It was as though the truth of Iona's people was finally coming to light, and the land itself was honoring their history, their struggle, and their resilience. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, and Caleb instinctively reached out to steady himself. The air felt alive with the weight of centuries, the echoes of countless lives and stories intertwined with the earth beneath them. As the light from the stone began to fade, Iona turned to Caleb, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "We are not just survivors," she said, her voice strong now. "We are the keepers of this land, the protectors of its truth. And it is time for us to reclaim what is ours." Caleb nodded, the gravity of her words settling deep within him. He wasn't just following Iona anymore. He was standing with her, fighting for the future of her people, and his own. Whatever came next, Caleb knew that this journey had only just begun. As the light from the stone began to fade, the air in the canyon still seemed to pulse with the energy of the revelation. Iona stood silently, her gaze fixed on the now dull surface of the stone. Caleb remained by her side, his mind reeling from what had just transpired. He had never imagined that something as simple as a stone could hold such power, such significance. And yet, here they were, standing at the heart of a truth that had been hidden for generations. The riders slowly began to gather around them, their faces filled with a quiet reverence. It was clear that they understood the importance of this moment in a way Caleb could not yet fully grasp. He glanced at Iona, who still seemed to be processing what had just happened. There was no panic in her eyes, no fear, only a quiet resolve, as if she had known all along that this day would come. She turned to him, her voice steady but filled with a sense of finality. "We must move," she said. "The truth has been awakened. There is no turning back now." Caleb nodded, his thoughts a swirl of questions, but he knew better than to ask them now. Whatever this truth was, it was clear that it would change everything, and Ayana was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The riders began to mount their horses, and Ayana led the way, her movements confident and assured. Caleb followed closely behind, the weight of the stone's glow still heavy in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that the canyon, the land itself, had just granted Ayana, and perhaps him, a kind of power, a connection to something ancient and deep. They moved through the canyon in silence, the only sound being the rhythmic thudding of hooves against the hard earth. As they made their way deeper into the canyon, Caleb noticed the landscape around them seemed to change. The jagged rocks and narrow paths gave way to wider expanses, and the air seemed to grow thicker, as if the very earth was holding its breath, waiting. After a time, they arrived at a clearing, and Caleb's eyes widened at what he saw. There, at the center of the clearing, was a great stone structure, ancient and weathered, its surface etched with more of the strange symbols Caleb had seen before. It was larger than any of the canyon walls, and its presence was overwhelming. The riders dismounted once again, and Ayana stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch the stone. Caleb followed her, feeling as if they had just crossed a threshold into a place untouched by time. "This is where it all ends," Ayana said quietly, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. Caleb could feel her connection to the place, as if it was part of her very being. He stood back, giving her space to absorb the moment, to embrace the significance of what had brought them here. The riders formed a circle around them, their faces serious, their eyes never leaving Ayana. Caleb could feel the gravity of their gaze, as if they were all waiting for her to make the next move. Ayana stood still for a long moment, her hand resting against the stone, her eyes closed. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with a quiet certainty. "It is time for my people to return to what is theirs," she said. "The land has spoken. And now, we must listen." Caleb's heart raced at her words. This wasn't just about uncovering a truth, it was about reclaiming something lost, something that had been stolen. The weight of the land, of history, seemed to settle over him. They were about to begin something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. Ayana turned to him, her eyes steady and full of purpose. "We have come this far together," she said softly. "And now, we must move forward." Caleb nodded, his breath catching in his throat. Whatever came next, he knew he was ready to face it, with Ayana by his side. The riders began to prepare for the journey ahead, packing supplies and securing their horses. Caleb's mind raced as he watched them, but he knew that this was just the beginning. The truth had been revealed, and now it was time to fight for what was rightfully theirs. With a deep breath, Caleb joined Ayana, ready to follow wherever this journey would lead. He had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time in his life, he knew his path was clear. Together, they would face the future, and reclaim the past. The riders moved with a quiet intensity, their horses' hooves beating in sync as they ventured deeper into the wilderness. Caleb followed closely behind Ayana, his thoughts still a whirl of uncertainty. But there was one thing he knew for sure: this journey had changed him in ways he couldn't yet understand. The air grew colder as they ascended a rugged pass, the shadows of the canyon deepening with each passing hour. Ayana, unbothered by the growing chill, led the way, her focus unwavering. Caleb couldn't help but watch her, the weight of their shared purpose settling over him like a heavy cloak. This was no longer just about helping a woman escape, it was about standing together for something much greater. As the night settled around them, the group came to a halt at the base of a great cliff. The land here felt different, almost sacred, as though they had crossed into a place that held the very spirit of the Apache people. Ayana dismounted and motioned for Caleb to follow her. The riders gathered around, their faces solemn, their eyes filled with a quiet anticipation. Ayana stood before them, her gaze lifting toward the sky, her expression filled with something Caleb couldn't quite place: determination, yes, but also a deep sense of belonging, as if this moment was something she had always known was coming. "This is where we make our stand," Ayana said, her voice steady, filled with authority. Caleb felt a surge of pride for her, realizing that this was the moment she had been preparing for. The truth was no longer just a revelation, it was now a call to action. The land calls to us, Iona continued, turning to face the group. For too long, we have been silenced. But tonight, we reclaim our voice. The riders nodded, their faces hardening with resolve. Caleb could see the fire in their eyes, the same fire that had sparked within him ever since he had set foot on this land. This was about more than survival. This was about honor, about justice, about returning what had been taken. Iona reached into her pouch, pulling out the stone once more. This time, it gleamed with a brilliance that Caleb had never seen before. She held it up to the sky, and for a moment, it seemed as if the very stars themselves responded, their light shifting in acknowledgement. This stone is the key to our history, Iona said, her voice rising with conviction. It holds the truth of our past and the power to shape our future. And now, we must use it to guide us. Caleb stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't fully understand the significance of the stone, but he could feel its power, its weight. He had never believed in such things before, but standing there with Iona, surrounded by these warriors, he realized that sometimes, belief didn't come from logic, it came from the heart. The group gathered closer, their hands raised in a silent gesture of unity. Caleb felt the weight of their collective resolve, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly connected to something greater than himself. The land, the stone, Iona, they were all part of a story that had been waiting to be told. And now, that story would unfold. We move at dawn, Iona declared, her voice ringing with finality. Tomorrow, we take back what is ours. The riders nodded, their faces set with determination. Caleb felt the ground beneath him shift, and in that moment, he knew that whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. Together, they would fight not just for survival, but for the future of the Apache people. As the night grew darker, Caleb stood by Iona's side, his heart filled with a quiet strength. He had come a long way since he first crossed paths with her, and now, as they prepared for the journey ahead, he knew that the path they walked was one they would walk together, united in their cause. The dawn would bring with it a new beginning, and with it, the chance to reclaim what had been lost.